Russia expert Fiona Hill captured the nation's attention 2 years ago when she testified during President Trump's impeachment hearing. Now she's out with a new book, There Is Nothing for You Here. I sat down with her this week to discuss her own journey to becoming a presidential advisor and why she fears the U.S. is heading down a dangerous path. Fiona Hill, thank you very much for joining us. Congratulations on the book.
Oh, thanks so much, Judy. It's great to be here.
So people know you as an expert on Russia and on Europe, but this is a book that is built around your personal story. The daughter and the granddaughter of coal miners who, overcame obstacle after obstacle to end up advising presidents of the United States. And there was advice that your father gave you when you were younger that you turned into the title of the book.
That's right. When I was leaving high school in 1984 in the northeast of England, there was a massive unemployment crisis, especially for youth. 90% of kids who were leaving school had nothing to go on to immediately. And my dad, was basically talking to me about the future. And he basically said, look, if you want to make something of yourself, you want to pursue an education, you want to find a good job, there's nothing for you here, pet. You're going to have to go somewhere else. Because my hometown, former mining town, a town that had built up around associated industries, very much like many places across the United States in the Midwest or Appalachia, basically was an opportunity desert. And people were going to have to leave in droves from the place to basically get ahead in life. And that was the sad reality of the time.
This is a book of you overcoming, as I said, obstacles, whether it was to getting an education, to getting a job, to getting ahead in this all-male, almost all-male profession. What were the lessons that you took away from that?
Well, there's a series of larger lessons in this that I did find opportunity, and obviously I had some amazing opportunities and a lot of career success. But what I took away from this was the importance of mentorship and also the importance of assistance, to give you a hand up, not a handout in life, but a hand up. Because I didn't really do all of this on my own. Of course, I worked hard at school. I was very focused on basically all of my studies. I, wanted to pursue an education as far as it would take me, and it took me to Harvard University and, many other things beside. But all the way along this educational path, I had a grant, I had a subsidy. I graduated without any educational debt at all. But the lesson is that it actually takes a lot of effort to be able to get ahead. And in that period, that's the end of the 20th century, it's even more difficult now at the beginning of the 21st.
How many young people would you say today, in whether it's the United States or Great Britain, have the opportunities that Fiona Hill had?
A lot less than there should be, because you would expect that over the decades since I graduated high school, since 1984, that there would have been a steady progression and improvement of people into education, and that opening more doors for opportunity. Well, in fact, there has been an expansion of education, but also a massive expansion of educational debt, because there aren't the grants, there aren't the subsidies that there used to be. And so education is becoming a burden in many respects. And it's putting education out of reach of the people at the lowest income bracket. And what we're seeing now in the US in particular, but also increasingly in the UK, is that education and that line whether you've gone to a college, a community college, 2-year or a 4-year college, is really determinative of who you are. It's a determiner of economic class and of, basically the way you're going to vote and where you're likely to live as well.
Of course, Fiona Hill, the reason so many people know your face, is because you were testifying in those first House congressional hearings into former President Trump, impeachment hearings. Why did you go to work in his administration?
Well, first of all, it was in the interests of public service. I'd already been in previous administrations, both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, working as the National Intelligence Officer for Russia. I wrote a book on Vladimir Putin, for example, after I'd left my previous public service, that we were at serious risk of being exploited by the Russian security services. And of course, we saw that in 2016 with the sophisticated influence operation that was launched against the US democratic system and against the US presidency. And I wanted to do something to address that. Of course, things didn't quite go as I hoped they would. National security issues ended up being pushed downwards, and we saw much more of the sort of privatization of foreign policy, the efforts to manipulate national security policy for domestic political purposes that was happening, throughout the whole of that 4 years.
Ultimately, what was your assessment of Donald Trump as a person and as a president?
Well, as a person, he was extremely vulnerable to manipulation. And that became a problem for him as a president. And what I mean by that is he had a very fragile ego. And he was very susceptible to flattery, as well as taking massive offense, as we all saw, to any kind of criticism. So on a personal level, that was also a pretty dangerous flaw. When you're the president of the United States, it becomes a fatal flaw, because President Trump couldn't disassociate or disentangle himself from many of the issues that were the critical ones to address. So when people were concerned about Russian influence in the United States election, he only thought about how that affected him, for example. When people talked about the changes in the US economic structure, he would always think, first of all, about how that might affect him and about how that might affect how people would vote for him. So as a president, he was uniquely preoccupied with himself, not with the country. And that, of course, made all of the problems of intelligence risks even higher, because the Russians or others from the outside could also manipulate those tendencies.
So if you can answer this, is the world safer or is it more dangerous because of his presidency?
Well, I think it's become more dangerous because he was also extremely divisive, because President Trump was very focused on getting re-elected. And he wasn't going to do that by appealing to all Americans. He wanted to appeal to a particular base of people who were attracted by his personality, attracted by the things that he said he was going to do for them. And of course, that's on different parts of the economic scale. On the socioeconomic lower levels, it's for people he said he was going to find them a job. He was going to sort of fix the economy so that they would have jobs. At the top end, among millionaires and billionaires, it was that he was going to protect their fortunes from being from those circles himself.
What I find so striking is that you weren't so concerned about Donald Trump being controlled by Vladimir Putin, being influenced by Vladimir Putin, as you were concerned about the United States following on the same political path that you've seen Russia follow under Vladimir Putin.
That's absolutely right, because Russia went through a similar wrenching economic period and political period in the 1990s. So Russia had its equivalent of the Great Recession. And at the end of that decade, President Putin comes in and says, I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to make Russia great again, which, of course, is what President Trump said in 2016. And what Putin did was basically tie himself up into all of these politics. He, of course, has extended his terms in office through amending the Constitution. He can essentially be president until 2036. And Donald Trump has also said that he wants to be president in perpetuity. He wouldn't accept that he lost the 2020 election. He's saying he's going to come back, that he has a right to come back because he was never kicked out of office in the first place. And he's been spreading lies about essentially his own role in the events that we've seen over the last several years, January 6th, for example, and the storming of the Capitol.
Do you believe our democracy is in danger as a result of this?
And I think that danger is increasing by the day, because we're constantly seeing other political figures trying to emulate Trump. We're now in a situation where lies and deceit have become the coin of governance.
It's a disturbing conclusion in this book. Fiona Hill, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Judy. I really appreciate it. Thank you.